you need to start the video.
Good evening all. I welcome back councillors as well as those people watching the broadcast to the Ashton District Council's meeting reconvened from yesterday, adjourned session. This evening we will be discussing the time critical Stansted Airport appeal, decisions and the council's application for permission to apply for a planned statutory review. Can I remind members that we are still operating the 2-hour meeting limit in line with the Council Chamber's risk assessment. Therefore, please be concise when speaking and avoid repetition where possible. Thank you. Firstly, some housekeeping. We have apologies from councillors Paddock, Armstrong, Tate, Bagnall, Eek, Asker, Isham and Lodge for today's session. Are there any further apologies, please?
Apologies, Chair. Councillor Dean phoned a few moments ago. He's stuck in traffic. He's here.
I won't be able to see you tonight. Yesterday we did not report items. Sorry. Are there any declarations of interest? Yesterday we did not report on item 7 to confirm no matters have been received about joint arrangements and external organisations. We also have item 12, green tests for the local plan to deal with. Due to the time critical nature of the Stansted Airport item, I propose to move to item 13 first. Please note that I have agreed to open up a dedicated public speaking sessions to the Stansted Airport appeal item due to the urgent nature of the decision and the lack of opportunity to register before the deadline. We have one public speaker tonight, Councillor Isham, who cannot be with us in the chamber and he has registered to speak.
Good evening. I hope you can hear me. Hello. Are you able to hear? Yeah, good. Thank you. I'm Veer Isham, District Councillor. I was elected as an R4U councillor and campaigned on a manifesto promise by that party to work for a better airport for our community, in particular matters relating to air quality, noise, and the impact of the airport on local residents. Since leaving R4U, I've never spoken about my reasons for doing so. There are 2 reasons, one of which is not for tonight. The other relates to how the airport planning application and ultimately the hearing were conducted by this administration. I had phone calls with both councillors Lodge and Evans before and during the hearing to raise my concerns and the concerns of others, including residents, that the defence case appeared not to be fully defending the decision of PlanCom. I was assured that the UDC Council were vigorously defending the PlanCom refusal notice. I argued this was not the case, as evidenced by the UDC opening statements at the hearing. As things have transpired, the decision papers record there was a view that no credible defence had been offered by the UDC team. Importantly, the inspectors were disappointed that no member from the planning committee were being offered as witness at the hearing. I and many members expressed extreme concern over the potential effectiveness of Condition 15. Members were forbidden by council to have any part in the building of the defence case. This seemed out of step with previous airport planning appeals, but it was defended by both councillors Evans and Lodge. I expressed my disappointment that UDC were not working with SSE, now Stansted Airport Watch, and that UDC was seen by Stansted Airport Watch to be as much in opposition to them as STAL, or Manchester Airport Group. We lost this case. Condition 15 and the lack of evidence to support a full refusal were cited by the inspectors as material to their decision. I consider this to be a failure of governance, a failure at council. If I were present and able to cast my vote tonight, I am minded to agree with the officer recommendation. This endeavour, our endeavour, was lost some time ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. I now ask the Chief Executive to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. The report is as presented, and for people watching remotely is available on the Council's website. I have nothing to add to the report other than to note that we have been able to provide all of the details in this report in a public domain, and all the debate on any items in that report can be held in the public domain. Ideally, and with the urging and support of members, if at all possible, avoid any need for the meeting to move into a private session to discuss any particularly confidential matters. So hopefully we'll be able to be in public. And beyond that, I've nothing to add.
I call for a seconder.
Yes, I can't propose. Councillor Leeds.
Oh, sorry, I thought we'd get it over and done. Sorry.
I'm proposing, if I may, Chair, that this council accepts the recommendation of the Chief Executive to accept the judgment of the members of Mrs. Justice. Now, I have to confess, I feel a little bit like there's three people in the Wizard of Oz that need a brain, a heart, and courage. And it's with a heavy heart that I have to go with this recommendation. I said to the arrangement, I think at times we have to display courage that we've come to an end, and I would like to propose that we accept this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leeds. Call for a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Evans. Now to the Chair, because again my deputy is not with me, I'd like to ask Council permission to ask someone else to be my deputy to tell me whose hand went up next. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because I know that Councillor Gregory, you have to leave, don't you? So could I ask that Council allows Councillor Freeman to tell me who's put their hand up, please? Thank you. Would you like to join me, Richard? Sorry, Councillor, I missed you. As I said, you see, I need that deputy to tell me to put their hands up. Councillor Fairhurst.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe we've submitted an amendment to the motion, and I wonder if you might accept that.
If I might advise, Chair, that a discussion with councillors, although this motion is similar to a motion previously rejected by the council, which requires under the Constitution Standing Order 13.2, a quarter of members of council, that is 10 out of 39, to signify, to sign the motion for it to be, the amendment for it to be debatable. 10 or more members have signed that motion, and it's now being passed around. So okay, you might want to pause for a moment before starting Councillor Fairhurst's clock, whilst all members have the written notice of the amendment passed around.
Thank you, Chair. I will now ask the meeting to stand down for 5 minutes while you have the opportunity to read the amendments. councillor, all members, sorry, I was going to make a judgment.
Councillor, the amendment which has been signed by 11 members reads, this council is extremely disappointed that its application to the High Court for permission to apply for a planning statutory review has been refused. Number two, it considers that the responsibility for failure lies with key members from the administration party. In the interest of proper accountability, the council calls upon the leader, deputy leader, the portfolio holder for planning, and the chair of the planning committee to resign, primarily because of their abject failure to oversee the defence of the unanimous decision of the planning committee in January 2020 to refuse permission to London Stansted Airport to expand to 43 million passengers per annum. This has cost the council taxpayers in upwards within the region of £2.5 million. Three, on condition that this call for resignations is endorsed, council resolves to cease legal action related to the airport appeals process, proposed by Councillor Fairhurst, and signed, as I say, by 11 members of the authority. This has the effect, therefore, of replacing the main motion proposed by Councillor Leeds, should it be passed.
I'll give council 2 more minutes to gather their thoughts, and then we will reconvene. Proposal of the amendment, please amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Might I talk to the motion? Councillors Stalgate, listening disaster. The rumblings of the storm, Mr. Chairman, have been coming for almost 2 years.
Chair, I can't hear when people have got masks on their face. Could that be removed? Would you mind Thank you, Chair.
The rumblings of the storm, Mr. Chairman, have been coming for almost 2 years. At a legally constituted meeting, our planning committee was universally decided to refuse this application, primarily on 4 climate change grounds. Our leader later applauded this decision and promised to defend any appeal that was raised. Yet no minutes were taken, no recording of proceedings made, and almost 6 months later, a new and rather novel decision notice emerged, looking nothing at all like the decision of the committee. This decision notice, it was pointed out, actually allowed the applicant the opportunity to submit more evidence to heal the application, which of course they did. Something was surely amiss. Once the appeal was lodged, those of us concerned about this switcheroo raised these issues with the council's appointed QC and were rebuffed with a "it's a shrewd device." Suddenly we were taking on another position, not absolute refusal at all on 4 climate issues, but approval with a shrewd condition 15. This, Mr. Chairman, was categorically not what our planning committee had decided, and as stated at the time, was doomed to failure. At subsequent briefings, we were assured that we were determined to win, but our every request for explanation and clarification was met with an omerta of legal privilege, or simply, members have no role in these proceedings. No role indeed. In early December, we were finally told of our tenuous defence and, of course, deadline, and immediately called for an urgent ECM, an emergency council meeting. This urgent ECM took a month to call, and at that meeting, we were tasked for an open debate and an answer to just 16 questions. The leadership actively stifled this and instead withdrew to a secret meeting place. We were once again told, put in our place and told, promised by the leader himself, to get written answers to all our questions. Mr. Chairman, to date, these answers have not been received. A cross-party group of 15 councillors subsequently met and agreed to watch the appeal proceedings. All of us were concerned that the risks were huge and the strategy seriously flawed. Our worst fears were realised, Mr. Chairman, when on opening statements, our defence team openly conceded the 4 issues of the planning committee and instead proposed to allow the development, but incrementally in terms of this magic condition 15. This is precisely what we warned against 5 months earlier and exactly what the leadership had denied. Yet we were not allowed to voice concerns or even question the risks. Throughout this sorry mess, Chair, we have been stifled, threatened with legal action, and placated whenever we raised concern. Yet there we were, watching a train wreck in slow motion. Ironically, we were even threatened with hefty costs award if we failed to silently, blindly support our defence team. Unfortunately, the inspectors saw through the ruse. They actually state that we did not even defend the planning committee decision. And of course, they upheld the appeal. Indeed, I believe they failed to address the climate change issues or take due consideration of 6 carbon budget. But despite that, they upheld the appeal. Of course, we have subsequently attempted a statutory review and predictably included the defence of our condition 15. And also predictably, the Honourable Judge decided it was unarguable, as the inspectors had already found the application to be sustainable. And so here we are tonight. Again, predictably, we're now asked for the first time since January planning meeting to get involved.
Councillor Fairhurst, you've got a minute left.
Thank you.
I'll
I'll
give you
talk after 9.
I'll give you 15 extra seconds.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We get involved so now we asked to get involved and pull the plug democratically. Yes, Mr. Chairman, while councillors Lodge, Lees, Evans and Merrifield were happy to exclude us from all decision-making when we faced the ultimate and hardest decision to digest a multi-million-pound penalty, now, Mr. Chairman, it's a collective decision. And yet, regrettably, we must take this decision. It's no longer a simple question of who's right, but who has deeper pockets, and perhaps who has better counsel. But only on the understanding, only on the undertaking that our leadership, the leader himself, his deputy, who swore that our questions would be answered, and our deputy scoffed at our concerns, and the 2 members who were specifically appointed to represent us take responsibility for their outcome. They are all culpable. They were all in the know and all aware of our grave concerns and inherent risks. Yet they and their cabinet were eager to please, happy to support, and willing to be led like lambs to slaughter at the expense of the resident. Mr. Chairman, they must now tonight accept culpability in the interest of good governance and common decency. Mr. Chair, they must now resign. They must face their voters and acknowledge their complicity in the scandalous and sorry saga.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does the seconder wish to speak now or later?
I'll reserve my right to speak until later.
Thank you. I call for other speakers. 2 have already indicated that they wish to, and I call on Councillor Gregory first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. My apologies to Council. I need to leave this meeting relatively soon. I'm very grateful for the Chair letting me speak. Councillor Fairhurst is, as always, extraordinarily eloquent. I sat in this room as a member of the public just before the 2019 election, when in a masterpiece of procedural ambush, he managed to stop the decision notice being granted. And I think everybody is enormously grateful to Councillor Fairhurst and his colleagues for the passionate and diligent way they have.
Councillor Gregory, could you?
Can you not hear me?
Not very well, because you're not speaking into spit. I mean, on this occasion, I never say this, but you can sit down if you like.
Oh, thank you.
Speak, and you can speak into it.
Thank you. Is that better?
Thank you.
Councillor Fairhurst and his colleagues showed huge passion and commitment, and I really do understand and share their frustration. I'm not happy with the position we find ourselves in. I'm not terribly impressed with the way the defence was conducted, and we can pick out various items of that. In particular, the loss of the audio recording from the actual public hearing in January 2020. But we've been here before, haven't we, with votes of no confidence. And the test for a vote of no confidence is a high one. There has to be an egregious failure. So have we had an egregious failure? Well, I'm not sure we have. There are a number of points, aren't there? First of all, there are certainly statutory bars to direction of the conduct of an appeal by councillors. We have to listen to officers, we have to take advice from officers, we have to listen to council. We've had detailed advice from council, a very, very expensive QC. And of course, we have a scheme of delegation, which provides certain freedoms for officers to act as they think fit at our discretion. I venture to suggest that there's some degree of collective responsibility here. We spoke last night about the Government's Review Working Group, and we spoke about the apparent defects in the Constitution and the areas that haven't been reviewed. I think we need to actually look very carefully at the extent to which we have all collectively exercised our duties of seeking accountability and pursuing oversight before we seek to single out 3 or 4 people, or in particular 1 or 2 people, Councillor Evans of Merrifield, who led this difficult process the best way they could under very clear advice and very constrained circumstances. Now, I venture to suggest that this is not about individual failing, this is about collective failing, and the fact that for a long time we've ignored revision to the basics of how we conduct our own business and the work that we require or request officers to undertake on our behalf. So I sympathise enormously with Councillor Fairhurst's position, with his eloquence, and with those who are supporting this motion. If I were able to be here for the vote, I would not be able to support it because I think fundamentally it seeks the wrong targets. And I would venture to suggest that we need some period of reflection rather than some period of finger pointing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bagman. Councillor Bagman. Councillor Driscoll. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. As most of you know, I tend to say it as I feel, but I believe Councillor Gregory has covered most of what I wanted to say a lot more elegantly. This is the second vote of no confidence, if you like, in probably as many meetings. Wasn't long ago. And I believe this is politically minded, especially as scrutiny will be looking at the whole process. I'm not quite sure on the date of it, but fairly shortly. I don't believe any blame can be put in place at the moment until scrutiny have had their say on what they believe has happened or not. Therefore, I will not be supporting the motion on the grounds of scrutiny will be looking at it and the fact that I believe this is politically motivated motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anybody else indicate they wish to speak? So far. Councillor Barker, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually think the saddest thing about being here today is the fact that the leader of the council is not here. It fell to Councillor Lees to put this forwards. I have always been, sadly, a believer that maximum use of one runway at Stansted was almost inevitable. I seem to remember a few years ago it suggested that one runway would take 50 million. So I won't be on this council, but others will when you debate that in years to come. But I do find it very sad that Councillor Lodge, who has led this process, is not here to put his point forward or even to vote. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Chair. I will answer that point, if I may, Councillor Barker. Councillor Lodge is abroad at the moment, and as I'm sure most of us are aware, not many of us have had an opportunity to go away. He went away last week and this has been fast forwarding and there hasn't been an ability for him to get a plane to cycle back. I think it's a little bit unfair when we've been working at such a fast pace to expect somebody to stop their holiday if they can and get a flight. So we might need to make that clear that the gentleman, Councillor Lodge, is away for a valid reason. I would like, if I may, just to have a couple of points. It's never great when things don't go your way. We all here are extremely disappointed at where we are today. I do want to answer a couple of Councillor Fairhurst's points, if I may. First is, I don't ever recommend scoffing, and I take umbrage at that word. Scoffing isn't one of my things that I do wrong. I do many things wrong, but it's very rarely scoffing. So I take umbrage at that personally. I don't believe I've ever scoffed, as you said. I also am completely unaware of any secret meetings, and I think Councillor Evans and Councillor Merrifield that spoke to the officers, they were not secret meetings whatsoever, so I need to absolutely clear that out. I could go on, but one thing I would like to say is I would be more than happy to face my voters where I live tomorrow at a by-election at any point, because I think I'd be okay, actually. I would challenge whether other people may be quite so secure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've read residents' press release on the outcome that brought us here tonight. That they continue to focus solely on the climate agenda to the detriment of all of the other considerations and policies that were relevant to the original planning application demonstrates precisely, in my mind, why we are in this position today. It is not true to argue that the government and the planning inspector didn't consider the environmental impact of the expansion at the airport.
So if I move to your question.
I'll take that.
I believe that Councillor Smith is on the right track, that this should come later. This is not about your amendment. Thank you.
Sorry, sorry, I don't quite pick the point of order up.
I understand where Councillor Smith is coming from, but I believe this should be before we vote on our actions, rather than about whether we accept the amendment to the motion. I believe we're on the wrong track.
Sorry, Councillor, I don't think that is a point of order.
Fine, that's the ruling.
Thank you, Chair. The inspector, in his 2 letters determining the outcome of the application, explained that the environmental impact had been assessed and found to be acceptable. It's also worth highlighting the national policy, as Councillor Barker has alluded to, which seeks to make full use of the existing capacity of new runways. You can disagree with government policy and as much as you like, but you can't ignore the relevant policies. That the administration continue to attempt to deflect blame and put this solely on the square of the government demonstrates that they don't take their responsibilities to the district seriously. Be under no mistake, spending in excess of £2.5 million, as set out in Appendix A on the report before us, on an action that this council didn't have to take, the application had been approved. You decided to overturn that, and that was your decision. But which, in my opinion, there was little prospect of success. It's a disaster for the district. This is not our money to fritter away. It's taxpayers' money, and this council has a fundamental duty to spend public money wisely. This council has lost. It now needs to accept that outcome and move on. But I would like to see some accountability, and I have to say, I know the Councillor Lodge is absent, but he does have to accept some responsibility as the leader of this council. The 2.5 million or 2.6 million that's in the report, that could have been better spent on so many council services. And I have to say, I think also that the taxpayers of the district also deserve an apology from this council for the waste of that money. it's clear to me the council has to accept that it's lost. But I think also there has to be some culpability to it. Thank you.
Councillor, I have to say, they're not saying anything, but I do think that the administration made it quite clear when they were elected what they wished to do, and they were elected on a landslide. So I think that some of the remarks you made are a little bit past the moment. Councillor Reid. Reid, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that last point from Councillor Smith about the waste of public money, personally, I disagree with that. I think that we were bound to make all efforts to support the decision made by the planning committee, and I know that that is very much the view of very many, not all, but very many of the residents in the ward that I represent. So I just wanted to make that point clear. And personally, I regret that we weren't successful, but that I don't regret making the effort to do what has been done. Second point, Chair, is that I don't know how many speakers you are wanting to take, but I was suggesting that we might.
Councillor Reid, I will take as many speakers until I get to a point where I can't squeeze the vote in until 9. I'm very happy we called this meeting, and I will not curtail it until everybody's spoken who wants to.
Okay, because otherwise I was going to make the point that the motion should be put.
Are you proposing that, Councillor? Because obviously that's a challenge today, and I have to respond.
Yes, I think I am proposing that, yes.
I'm going to risk the wrath of the council, and they can obviously reverse this decision, but I intend taking up the speakers. And the challenge has to be to me, and you know the rules, but you can prove me wrong, but I don't believe we've had a debate after calling a special meeting for 40 minutes. I don't think that's long enough, Councillor Reid. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. As the recipient of this animated proposal from Councillor Fairhurst, I would like to say a few words. This is, I think, an unmerited and unjustified attack on me and the other individuals named in this proposal. I think it's actually unworthy of Councillor Fairhurst to put it forward in such an animated fashion. I am certainly, as I'm sure my colleagues are who are named in this proposal, willing to and will cooperate with the scrutiny committee in the way proposed, namely to examine the way in which this particular planning appeal was conducted. Scrutiny committee is seized with that task already, and we will be available and will cooperate, as will, of course, the officers, in responding to proceedings of that committee. This is simply a political stunt on the part of Councillor Fairhurst, I regret to say, and is unworthy of him. It actually does specifically call into question the competence, not only of we as members, name, but our officers and also our senior legal team, including Mr. Philip Coppell QC. He was, after all, a gentleman who was introduced to us by Mr. Fairhurst. I don't make any particular point about that, other than to say that if Mr. Fairhurst, Councillor Fairhurst, is actually alleging that there has been an ineffective defence of the council's position, then I think he should say so in express terms. I think that is in fairness to individuals such as Mr. Coppell, who is not present here this evening to defend himself. We are criticised for an abject failure to oversee. Now, we as members did not have the right, as has been laboured several times before, to oversee the defence. This is a matter delegated to officers. And I certainly am not seeking to avoid any responsibility on my part by saying that, but I do remind members about that and the process of delegation which applies. We will be ready to justify and explain the steps that we took to the scrutiny committee. Evidence is what was led before the appeal, and that evidence has to be respected. As I've said on previous occasions, the evidence from expert witnesses stands as they give it. It has to be open and honest, and Councillor Fairhurst would certainly understand that. You cannot criticise officers and members for the way in which the appeal has been run. It depends on the way that the evidence turns out on the day before the tribunal, in this case, the planning inspectors. That is what has happened. Councillor Fairhurst does not like the outcome. We are all disappointed at how things have turned out, but that is not a justification sufficient to ask for the resignation of Councillors Lodge, Lees, myself and Merrifield. I see no reason for me to resign, and I will not support this proposed amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. I intend to call in Councillor Merrifield, because she was named in the amendment. Councillor Chris Coley, Councillor Pepper, and I'll take Councillor Carl Ansell, and that will be then back to who seconded it? Oh, I forgot. Yeah, there's three.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I'll take all three, and we'll see. At that point, no, I won't do that then. I'll take them one at a time, and I will cut it down a little bit because we've got the full motion, whichever way it goes, to debate as well. So I'll decide as I go along. Councillor Merrifield.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Evans has actually said rather much what I wanted to say, but I would actually just like to correct Councillor Fairhurst. The decision notice did not come out 6 months afterwards. Decision notices don't come out 6 months afterwards. They never do, especially with refusals. Perhaps if it's an approval, they take longer to come out.
Sandy, sorry, Councillor Merrifield, would you like to sit down as well, please?
Yes.
People will pick it up. Sorry,
I'll get closer.
I'm sorry if you find it hard to
Is
sit
that-
down.
Is that better?
Thank you.
Is that better? Thank you. So I'll start again. Much of what I wanted to say, or what I said, Councillor Evans has said. Councillor Fairhurst said that the decision notice didn't come out until about 6 months afterwards. That is not accurate. Refusal decision notices come out virtually within a few days of the planning application being refused. Approvals come out later because there's section 106s and the like to be decided upon. So it wasn't 6 months later. And members are aware of that. The minutes didn't appear because, as you remember, we went, there was, minutes should, if my memory serves me right, and I have actually answered this question at scrutiny. That's the one question that has been asked. And I attended scrutiny. And I think that was obviously online. I attended and asked, there was a question asked, and I attended and answered that question from a member of the public and answered that. And they did appear, because if you remember, I think it was they were going to come to the March planning committee. And that was the first planning committee that was cancelled when we went into the first lockdown. And then it took a while for us to get there. So, as I say, I've already answered that question, scrutiny. So I am disappointed. It was rather flowery. This councillor Fairhurst's speech tonight, so I'll leave it at that, but I certainly won't be supporting this. I am very disappointed, as we all are, at the results of the request to appeal, but that's where we are, so I will not be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murfield. Councillor Criscola.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think it gives anyone, any signatory to this particular motion, any great deal of pleasure to bring it forward. In fact, it's particularly difficult given that many of the people that are written down on this piece of paper I actually enjoy talking to. But this is not about that. This is about the fact that the administration are willing to go with officers when they want and are willing to hide behind them when they don't. And that is disgraceful. It really, really is. And I'm just astounded. I mean, I haven't even got anything written down to say because I just couldn't find the words until now. I felt compelled to speak bluntly because the audacity of councillors from this administration to stand up and hide behind officers is unacceptable. We might as well all go home. We might as well all go home. We'll let Mr. Holt carry out the transactions of the council along with all of his colleagues. And we might check in every so often and say, hey, we were elected, is everything going all right? What would be the point in elected councillors? What would be the point in a political leadership? Frankly, I don't think there's much point in the one we've got, but I think that's by the by. I'm really, really disappointed at this decision by the High Court, which might sound funny, actually, given that I didn't support the original wishes and ultimately the decision of the planning committee. But in reality, I'm a bit of a stickler of the process. And for me, this is not about what decision the planning committee made. It's about the fact that they've been shafted by the administration, who couldn't take leadership, who couldn't deal with what was in front of them properly, who failed to uphold the decision of the planning committee by basically letting people run away with it, lead an awful defence at planning appeal, and then wonder why councillors from other parties are worried about it. It's unbelievable. I'm really actually quite saddened that all of the blame keeps being shifted to other people. How on earth is this still blaming the government for all of our problems? I don't know. How you can intertwine the courts with the government, I don't know. I can't even believe I'm saying something like that, because you wouldn't think that reasonable people would do something so stupid. For me, this comes down to incompetence. And as I say that, I genuinely say that with a heavy heart, because I do get on with these people, but it's business. There has to be accountability in this council for decisions that are made, whether they're made under the scheme of delegation or whether they're made democratically by a cabinet. There has to be accountability. Yes, we're going to do a scrutiny review, but I think what we actually need is an independent review. We can't be marking our own homework on this, whatever happens. We can't be. So that's another thing to take away from today. I do think that many councillors around this chamber would support. So all in all, a really sad set of circumstances that brings us here this evening. Did I think up until this evening that I'd be signing the vote of no confidence? No, I didn't, actually. A bit of a last minute thing. It wasn't on a whim. I read it and I thought, actually, that's appropriate. It is, notwithstanding police investigations and all that sort of stuff. So really sad, really disappointed. I know what way the result will go. Ultimately, people are willing to go that way. But I'm really, really sad at what we might carry out this evening. Thank you, James.
Councillor Criscola, the only thing that I would comment on, because you and I sit together on scrutiny, I never think that scrutiny is marking its own work. I think you and I both know that. So that's the only remark, but I hope that you don't. I'll call Councillor Day.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Well, one could really be disappointed with Councillor Crucione. I thought that's the most outrageous political theatre that I've witnessed since being a councillor. How dare he actually say that we don't work with officers, we hide behind them. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I would suggest to you, give me evidence of that, because I work exceedingly closely with the officers that I come into contact with. I have an excellent working relationship with them, and we produce results. So, Councillor Crucione, I would call on you really to withdraw some of that statement that you made. It's an awful piece of political theatre.
Thank you, Councillor Day. Councillor Light.
Thank you. Let me speak in a very undramatic way, just to calm the nerves of Councillor Evans and to reassure him this is not a political stunt. This is an issue of accountability. Who is accountable? The members are. The members who made the decisions, who worked with the defence team, who refused to tell the rest of the members what was going on, despite the fact that we asked question after question after question. Those councillors are accountable to the residents of this district. 2.6 million and maybe rising says that there must be accountability. And those councillors who have any responsibility in this debacle must, absolutely must, resign with immediate effect. This is a dramatic loss for the whole district. 2.6 million could have been spent better, as has already been said, elsewhere. Members were not allowed to participate in the decision-making process. Who came and asked us, the backbenchers, the other parties, the opposition, who came to say, what do you think about the defence strategy? Do you agree with it? Shall we go ahead? So I have to say, with great sadness, that I cannot now, at this last juncture, accept liability or responsibility. I have been excluded from the whole process, with a few briefings, but always the actual defence strategy was kept secret. Council, this is not the way we should be working. So I have to say that if this motion does not pass tonight, then I say that this council has no legitimacy and I will have no further part in it tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Light. I call Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm afraid that I'm adding to the political theatre tonight, because I think that this amendment is purely politically motivated. And I'm trying to sit here and imagine this playing out in Westminster. And I'm just seeing Caroline Lucas from the Green Party standing up and calling on Boris Johnson and members of the Cabinet to resign over one of the many setbacks that they have encountered during this year. And I know she has a great deal of support around the country. Unfortunately, in Westminster, she's on her own. So I thought maybe she might call upon Ed Davey to help her. For those of you who don't know, Ed Davey is the leader of the Lib Dems in Westminster. But then you have Ed Davey and Caroline Lucas standing up and calling upon Boris Johnson and members of the Cabinet to resign over one of the setbacks. I can't envisage that. I find that almost farcical. I find it very disappointing that members are trying to play stupid games like this in our elected body. And I sometimes think here of the wonderful comment from Dennis Healy about Lord Howe, where he said that being attacked by Lord Howe was like being savaged by a dead sheep. Unfortunately, I think we have a flock of dead sheep here tonight. I think they are trying to savage us, and I am really disappointed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Caton, would you wish to speak now? I shall be calling it to a close quite shortly.
I'll wait to sum up, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I'll wait to be the final speaker, which is normally what the secretary does.
Councillor Pepper.
I hope you don't mind if I sit down. Climate change is the greatest challenge facing our world today. All too often, global leaders' commitments to cut greenhouse gas emissions fall short and threaten to undermine their credibility on tackling this serious issue. Just like the Cumbrian coal mine and the Campo oil field, airport expansion is incompatible. We are effectively expanding a fossil fuel industry and adding even more carbon emissions into the atmosphere. Opposing airport expansion during a climate emergency was the right decision. This was not a politicized planning application. It was a moral obligation to secure our children's future. They will have to live with the consequences of our decisions. UDC had to make a stand. The cost to the planet far outweighs the cost to our council. Our world is sending out a very loud message. Climate change is real and it's happening now. There is overwhelming scientific evidence saying we have limited time to act. By allowing temperatures to rise more than 1.5 degrees, it will have hugely damaging effects for human, plant, and animal life across the planet. Therefore, all decisions must be centered around the 1.5 degree rise that threatens our survival. We have already witnessed catastrophic climatic events across the world. This will only get worse. This is why UDC declared a climate emergency and declared a climate and ecological emergency. We have committed the council to addressing climate change in a net 2030 carbon zero target. Stansted Airport is our biggest CO2 emitter in the east, but rather conveniently, it's not included in our carbon accounting because it's considered outside of our scope. We will be effectively producing a creative carbon accounting action plan. In February 2020, Friends of the Earth scored a huge victory for the planet when the Court of Appeal agreed that plans to build a third runway at Heathrow were illegal. But in December 2020, the Supreme Court overruled that decision, allowing the project to proceed to the next stage. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps rejected calls to oppose Heathrow's airport expansion on climate grounds. Shapps has argued it is not appropriate to review the airport's national policy statement on the basis of climate change or carbon policy at this stage. Shapps has also cited the COVID pandemic as a cause for delaying a potential review to the ANPS. It is too soon to determine what the effect of the pandemic will have on the long-term aviation demand, which the ANPS is predicted. The impact of COVID-19 on aviation passenger demand will continue to be monitored by the department. It is intended that the medium to long-term forecast will be produced as and when the data is available. and the outlook is more certain. How does our government's existing approach align with its long-term climate commitments, including net zero by 2050 and the sixth carbon budget, which commits the UK to reducing emissions by 78% by 2030, including international shipping and aviation, against a 1990 baseline? This government say one thing and do another. They are never consistent. What happened to your green revolution and building back greener? This decision will be made mockery of the UK's global leadership at COP26. There is no sound evidence that substantiates this decision.
45 seconds, Councillor Pepper.
No sound plan is in place to prove how our legal commitments will be met. You cannot count on sustainable aviation fuels and green technology that is in its infancy. These lifelong decisions will impact long life generations. I'm afraid I do not support your motion, Councillor Fairhurst. The outcome to our appeal was not down to our defence, but down to central government's stance on airport expansion. You're challenging the wrong people. My colleagues that are named in this motion did the best they could under the circumstances. Your allegations are unjust and unfair. Most of us share your disappointment. So I will not be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pepper. I've given permission for Councillor Cuscoli to just come back on something. I'm not quite sure what it is.
A point of clarification, Chair, to Councillor Dane's comments. This motion is nothing to do with it. It hasn't got your name on it. Okay, I actually happen to think you might be doing a bit of a good job at the moment, working well with officers. This is absolutely nothing to do with it. This is about the people who are accountable in respect to the item under discussion. Thank you.
I'm going to explain to Council what I'm going to do now so that everybody is under no illusions. I'm going to call Councillor Khan, then I'm going to lastly call Councillor Freeman, then I will give Councillor Caton the opportunity of seconding the motion, and obviously Councillor Barrows.
Chair, I did have my hand up for some time.
I know you know I wouldn't, but we have gone through a lot of people, Councillor, so I wouldn't exclude you necessarily. I do apologise. It's just that so many people want to speak, so I'm sorry. Now, first, I think I'll call Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. I will try and be brief. I mean, we're all here in sorrow tonight, aren't we? And Councillor Criscione made some very good points, and I particularly agree with his point that he just made about Councillor Day. Councillor Day, your name is not on here because you are doing a good job. What I would say is this, that leadership is tough, isn't it? I think we'll all agree. Whether the capacity we are in life, leadership is tough. You have to take tough decisions. Some are going to be popular, some are going to be unpopular. But clearly, when we are talking about the abject failure of a position that we find ourselves in now, with a cost of 2.5, 2.6 million pounds to the taxpayer, I think there needs to be accountability. And this is not personal, because actually I like many of the people around this table, in this chamber. I respect everybody in this chamber, particularly some of those individuals here actually who are named. But Councillor Lees, you talked about, and I agree with you, courage. I'm with you on that. But leadership takes courage, and leadership also takes, you have to be humble, show humility, grace, and take that decision and say, actually, you got it wrong. And I think the people mentioned here should reflect on their positions. I think they should resign. And I would say this, there are plenty of other people in after you who could step up and should step up if that's the case and do your role. You know, I find myself in sorrow here because actually none of us wanted to be here, but leadership is tough. Please show some humility, please show some grace, and reflect on your positions, and do the right thing. Public service demands that, accountability does as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's to address a point made by Councillor Cristiani, actually. I've served on planning committees for the best part of 20 years. And indeed, along with Councillor Lockwood, I don't think there's anybody else in this chamber right now who's had more time on development control of that. I have to be corrected. In fact, Councillor Lockwood and I deliberated with the Parliament team for the 2006, I think, Stansted Airport expansion. We served together on that. Councillor Cristiani made a very apposite point. What is the point of elected councillors? And I ask myself that question every time I sit in the planning committee. And the reason why is that planning has very little to do with democracy. And this particular incident, this event, demonstrates that beautifully. Because democracy is all about local people doing local things, I suppose. Whereas the airport decision is all about statism. It's about a decision for the state. The two don't map onto each other at all. What I say to people who come back to me and say, for goodness sake, why on earth did the committee ever pass that? What were you thinking? I explained to them very carefully, I'm happy to explain it again, is that actually when it comes to somebody who wants to turn a garage into a study or into a spare bedroom, we can give them a really hard time with it. We can make their lives miserable. On the other hand, if somebody comes along and wants to build 200 houses in a field contiguous to an existing town, come on in, we can't stop you at all. We have no mechanism for doing this. And the reason why is that's arranged from central government. Now, when this application came forward, the argument was put that it should be a Secretary of State affair. It should go to the Secretary of State. It's a national decision. It's beyond the scope and the capability of a district council. I didn't say that, but essentially it's what it means. And the Secretary of State said, no, you deal with this yourself. And that is really passing the buck. It's passing it back to a small authority, basically, an old expression, sending a boy to do a man's job. That's what happened. Should have been handled by the Secretary of State. This is a matter of statism. It's not a question of local democracy, but it's been dealt with at a local level. And that is very, very commonplace, I'm afraid, Councillor Cristiani, when it comes to planning stuff, the way it's fallen out at present. It's almost an inevitable result. It's very sad, but that's the way it is.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Councillor Kane.
Mr. Chairman, may I just interject with a point of, well, it's a point of order, but a point of clarification. It is my recollection that this council deliberately, I'll use that word, said it did not want this application to go to the Secretary of State, despite the proposals from what was at the time Stop Stansted expansion. So I'm afraid Councillor Freeman is misleading the council in saying what he just said. Thank you.
I don't intend to comment, Councillor, because I truthfully don't know whether you're right or not. So it's okay, and I'll let that lie. Councillor Caton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm rather disappointed that there seems to have been a lot of diversionary tactics by the defenders of the administration, because they didn't tackle the main issue, which was the planning committee unanimously refused permission for the expansion of Stansted Airport. We got to the appeal, and it was approval with conditions. Condition 15, which the inspectors regarded as unnecessary and illegal. And that is about competence. It isn't about climate change. It's not about what Councillor Vell said, a minor setback. It is actually a core policy of the administration.
I've been in the political game long enough to know that the main reason why Arthur Yu got elected was on opposition to the expansion of Stansted Airport. And that is why I think that the residents of Uttlesford deserve to hear your justification for that failure. And it is a failure. And I would say to Councillor Evans that, yes, you delegated decisions to the officers, but you cannot delegate responsibility. And it seems to me that the whole defense of the administration is to blame others, to say, oh gosh, oh God, it wasn't me. Well, I don't know if Councillor Day got away with that when he was a policeman, but it doesn't work here for me. And I have to say, I agree with a lot.
Councillor Tang, could you just sort of take that?
Okay, I was.
It was a bit personal, wasn't it?
It was said in humour.
Yeah, thank you.
But I agree, I put it in poor taste at the moment. So, I mean, one of the things that's interesting with Councillor Lavell's analogy was about Westminster politics, which apparently the RFU don't like, but it obviously.
Councillor Caton, could I ask you, sorry, I don't mean to sit down, what I mean, I think it'll be better if you do, is that all right?
Right, okay.
Thank you, I'll give you.
I'm talking about Councillor Lavell's comment that
now, I've lost my, I do apologise, I was just that you were vibrating. I will give you extra time, I'm sorry.
Okay, right, I shall have to move on there, but I mean, I have to say, I agree with some of the comments that Councillor Pepper agreed, but I now recall what Councillor Lavelle was talking about. He was talking about challenging the Prime Minister. And I think that even in Westminster parties, there is a movement, there is a cabinet reshuffle every so often where people are moved around and they are sacked. And that is all what this motion is about. It's about taking people and maybe moving them if you want to keep them in the cabinet. That's up to you. But I have to say that is accountability in Westminster. It appears that there is no accountability in others. And I find that extremely saddening. And on that point, I will complete my speech. Thank you very much.
I'd like to apologise if I did.
Well, I think you did actually impede my flow.
I do apologise. It wasn't intentional. I'm sure it wasn't intentional. I'm sorry. I call it out to the players. Want to wind up the debate.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the difference between the amendment and the motion itself is very simple. The one says we regrettably withdraw our action and accept the losses. So does the other. But the difference, in fact, lies in accountability and governance. I've been accused of speaking with an animated voice, and I apologize. Being accused of flowery is not quite as easy, but I must stress that the animation is due to frustration, which I feel a lot of us feel. I was also accused of a political stunt. It's hard to identify that because we had a full cross-party support of the process, including members from our party. I also feel that to blame the officers misses the point completely because, as we all know, officers recommend and members decide. But the most important thing was made by Councillor Khan. It's simple good governance. How can we turn to our residents and say, oops, we've lost 2.5 million and I'm afraid no one is accountable. That's life due. Well, it isn't life due. As far as we know it anyway. We have to find ourselves responsible if we put in charge. That's what the word responsible means. Whether you're responsible for a portfolio, for a campaign, or indeed for defense, you're responsible. That means you stand up at the end and say, mea culpa. I could have done better, or I could have done worse. It isn't personal, as Councillor Khan says. It's just the right thing to do. It keeps us clean and keeps us above reproach. That's the difference between the amendment and the initial motion. If we vote down the amendment, what we're saying is, this council can lose 2 million or more, and it's fine. We did our best. I don't think that's good enough, Mr. Chairman. I just don't think it's good enough.
Thank you, Councillor Hurst. I intend going to the vote now. All those in favour of the report? Or did you want the amendment read out?
May I call for a recorded vote, please?
Yes.
The amendment on which you're about to vote reads as follows. Number one, this council is extremely disappointed that its application to the High Court Commission to apply for planning statutory review has been refused. Number two, it considers that the responsibility for the failure lies with key members from the administration party. In the interest of proper accountability, the council calls upon the leader, deputy leader, the portfolio holder for planning, and the chair of the planning committee to resign, primarily because of their abject failure to oversee the defence of the unanimous decision of the planning committee in January 2020 to refuse permission to London Stansted Airport to expand to 43 million passengers per year. This has cost council taxpayers in Uttlesford in the region of £2.5 million. And three, on condition that this call for resignations is endorsed, council resolves to cease legal action related to the airport appeals process.
Thank you. As I said, we'll now move to the vote. All those in favour of the amendment, please show. Sorry? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Councillor Hurst. For recorded vote, sorry then.
Thank you, Chair. For, against, abstain, please, for the amendment, members. Councillor Armstrong is not here. Councillor Barker.
For.
Councillor Caton.
For.
Councillor Coote.
Against.
Councillor Criscione.
For.
Councillor Day.
Against.
Councillor De Vries.
Against.
Councillor Dean.
For.
Councillor Driscoll.
Against.
Councillor Emmanuel.
Against.
Councillor Evans.
Against.
Councillor Fairhurst.
For.
Councillor Foley.
Against.
Councillor Freeman.
Against.
Councillor Hargreaves.
Against.
Councillor Jones.
Against.
Councillor Khan.
For.
Councillor Lavelle.
Against.
Councillor LeCount.
Against.
Councillor Lees.
Against.
Councillor Lemon.
For.
Councillor Light.
For.
Councillor Lachlan.
For.
Councillor Luck.
Against.
Councillor Merrifield.
Against.
Councillor Oliver.
For.
Councillor Pepper.
Against.
Councillor Reeve.
Against.
Councillor Sell.
For.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Sutton.
Against.
Councillor Taylor.
Against.
That falls, Chair. I'll just count the votes.
Council, I intend to move to the vote on the recommendation. Is there any call?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I won't be able to participate in this vote. Any vote that agrees on a 2.5 million vote without any kind of accountability is something I cannot regard as legitimate. I will not participate in this vote.
Thank you. Antec. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Exactly the same. As I said before, this meeting no longer has any legitimacy. I cannot participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have the results of the count then, please?
Thank you, Chair. So that was 12 votes for, 19 against. The amendment falls.
I now intend moving to the vote. All those in favour, please show.
Chair, is everybody clear on what they're voting on now? Yeah, is everybody clear?
Does anybody need explanation, sorry?
Yeah.
I'm in councillor's hands. I thought we'd had a long debate. I thought we knew it was going to be happy to council it.
I'll read it out again. I'm so tempted to answer some of those things that were said that weren't said that were untrue earlier, but I'm not allowed to. I will be running out to speak to the press immediately.
Why not?
Right, the Chief Executive recommends the Council to accept the judgment of the Honourable Mrs. Justice Lang, OBE.
I now move to the vote. All those in favour, please show.
This is great.
Oh, bless you.
That's carried, Chair.
Carried. Anybody wish to vote against or abstain?
I'm not participating along with.
Thank you, council. That concludes business. I close the meeting at 8:30.
Oh,